what Israelis are doing is very often the opposite of what people believe we should be doing. The dangers to Israel are immediate and enormous. The situation is very bad. It hasn't been as bad for decades, for generations. Practically all international organizations have been prostituted. The young generation in Europe is not willing to fight for their freedom. When so many people from Afghanistan come to Europe, Europe will be like Afghanistan. Progressivism became the enemy of liberalism, like fascism became the enemy of nationalism. A government that has one set of values is so afraid of parts of its public opinion that it actually adopts the core ideas of the opposite side. The overwhelming majority of Israelis don't have feelings of guilt. We are sorry that civilians are always hurt. Everything international is dominated by 58 Arab and Muslim countries, and the danger is existential, and Israel cannot afford to adopt a policy that could cost it its very existence.
We're going to be reacting to Dan Schueftan, Daniel Schueftan, who is an Israeli academic and chairman. Give me one moment here. Israeli academic and chairman of the National Security Studies Center at the University of Haifa. He also serves as a senior lecturer at Haifa University's School of Political Sciences and has taught at the Israel Defense Forces National Security College and the IDF's Command and Staff College. Very well versed in history, very to the point, does not mince words. And Jonathan Sakardati has been on my channel. He is a British Jewish man. He just conducted the debate at Oxford University, and the topic was: do people have a right to be worried about Islam in the West? Essentially, he is, I believe, a columnist, journalist. He has a podcast. Jonathan's incredibly well-spoken, very knowledgeable. They're both great. This is a great collab for a podcast, so we're going to get right into it.
I'm Jonathan Sacerdoti. Dan Schueftan, thanks so much for joining me again. I wanted to talk to you because things are going pretty badly, one could say, in terms of Israel and its reputation and position in the world at the moment, despite the fact that, as you and I have spoken about before, actually Israel's doing quite well in many of its aims and strategies. And I saw a lecture that you gave in Hebrew at the INSS, in which you looked at why Israel finds itself in that precarious relationship with the rest of the world. And you made a very striking argument that many of the instincts and policies that are essential to Israel's survival are actually precisely why it's in this position at the moment. And it was a very interesting lecture in Hebrew, so I hope people who can understand that go and watch it. But I thought it might be interesting for us to discuss it here today in English. And so could you start maybe by outlining the shape and structure of the thesis, and then we can sort of dive in and explore it in a bit more detail?
Yes, you're right. The situation is very bad. It hasn't been as bad for decades, for generations, actually, because Israel is perceived in large parts of the world, including in Western civilization, as the supreme evil, as the worst thing that can possibly be for a country. And this reflects on the Jews, and they are accused of being complicit with Israel, doing the worst possible things against humanity. And usually people give simple-minded explanations. On one side, what they say, well, it's all anti-Semitism. They always hated the Jews. They hate the Jews now. And anti-Semitism explains most of it, if not everything. There is a grain of truth, an important grain of truth there, and we'll discuss anti-Semitism in a moment, but it cannot explain the overall phenomenon. On the other side, you have another simple-minded approach saying, it's because of the Israeli occupation, it's because of the suffering of the Palestinians, it's because the Israeli government made mistakes, it's because Israeli soldiers committed atrocities, it's because we have contributed to it. And again, We have contributed to it. We made mistakes. The Israeli occupation is not easy to explain for people who don't understand the history of the Middle East. And again, the grain of truth is important, but if you look at the overall picture, it cannot explain how deep and how wide this problem is, both for Israel and for Jews. And what I would suggest is an explanation basically focusing on what Israel must do existentially, because Israel is in a different situation than any other democracy has been, and that these necessities clash with the zeitgeist of Western civilization today, particularly after the Second World War and even more after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Western civilization essentially adopted an approach, adopted an explanation of the world, adopted policies that are based on a profound misunderstanding of what's going on in the world. It is based on a profound misunderstanding of the dangers facing Western civilization from barbarians who are trying to attack Western civilization. And Israel must clash with it because the dangers to Israel are immediate and enormous. So the clash explains why people don't like Israel, because what Israelis are saying and what Israelis are doing is very often the opposite of what people believe we should be doing. Then, when they already oppose Israel in a very major way, they need an arsenal in order to fight Israel. And then you have the anti-Semitic arsenal, so accessible, so helpful, in very specific ways that I will later explain in detail, that practically everybody uses it, including people who don't know that they're anti-Semites. In other words, they're using exactly what anti-Semites have been using for millennia, including the worst possible thing like the blood libel, and in their own mind, they're not anti-Semites. I'll try to show that it is anti-Semitic, and therefore anti-Semitism, whereas it's not explaining everything, is explaining a lot. And the third element is to point out two pathologies. The pathology of Western civilization, eager to accept blame for practically everything in the world, and the pathology of the third world, or particularly countries who have barbaric regimes, who are not willing to accept any kind of responsibility. So when you have the pathology of the West willing to accept every blame, even if it is completely unjustified as an analysis, and on the other hand, people in the third world not willing to accept any responsibility, including for the worst barbaric behaviors in the non-Western world, the two come together in hostility to Israel, because for the West to say we are to blame, but it's the Jews, and for the others, yes, the West is to blame, and particularly the Jews, which are the ultimate expression of Western civilization in their eyes. So when you bring together these three elements, the inevitable clash between Israel and the zeitgeist of today, and the pathologies that I mentioned a moment ago, and the instrument of anti-Semitism, I think the combination of these three can explain the reality that we're in.
So the word zeitgeist there that you used, I think, is really an interesting one, because it kind of suggests a fashion or a fad, or what's fashionable at the moment. And in terms of intellectual and cultural fashions, I think it's very true that you said in the lecture that the West and other parts of the world have come to adopt these almost impossible positions, and Israel simply can't afford to adopt those. Maybe you could talk a bit about what you mean by that. What exactly are those fashions, and why is it so problematic for the state of Israel?
Yes, but before I do, I'd like again to emphasize that Israel is in a very different position than anybody in Western civilization in recent generations has been. I mean, it's not just that we are threatened more than others, but it is multi-generational. We've already been exposed to it for more than 100 years. Everybody in Israel today knows that, at least for the foreseeable future, in terms of the next generation and perhaps the generation after that, we will again be presented with an existential danger, or at least with dangers that have an existential dimension. Maybe the existential danger is not immediate as long as the Iranians don't have nuclear weapons. But if you look at the process, Israel is in a constant situation for more than 100 years, even before the establishment of the State of Israel.
There's so many things to unpack here. And Dan makes such an incredible points. The Western world doesn't understand what Israel's dealing with because they don't have an immediate existential threat. They do have an existential threat. They're just asleep and don't realize it. And the Muslim world, if they're moderate, can live very, very well. But there are so many extremists among them that have a God commandment, a God-given commandment to make the entire world Islamic. So they're on a mission that they're not ever going to waver from. And the moderates are caught in the crosshairs, unfortunately. And they're not doing enough to stop it. They're either afraid to, or they're more supportive of it than we'd like to believe. And many people in the Western world who are progressive, they want to rid the world of violence and war, and they think that by singing Kumbaya, it'll all go away. And so Israel, confronted with this existential threat, which is immediate, doesn't have the luxury to sing Kumbaya. They're going to sing Kumbaya right to the grave. So the Western world doesn't understand Israel's show of strength and force. Some do, but many don't. And the Muslim world is crying victim because they're not able to accomplish the mission. They're saying, hey, Western world, look at these brutish Jews. Do something about it. And the Western world is coming to their rescue saying, this is terrible. You're right. They're killing you. But the reality is if Israel wasn't brutish in the way that it needs to be, it doesn't have a choice. It needs to defeat its enemies. Otherwise, its enemies will keep rising up to fight it. And so Israel's caught in the middle here. But the reality is, the reason why Israel's caught in the middle of it, in my opinion, is a spiritual reason. You look at Israel, the Middle East is the middle of the world. It's the center of the world. Jerusalem is the center of monotheism. It really, when you get spiritual, it all makes sense. The Jews are at the center of all this conflict and fighting and all these things because this is kind of what God wants. This is kind of what God ordained. So when Jews lean into their identity and do what needs to be done in terms of being who we're supposed to be, being proud, being a light unto the nations, then things balance out. The word balances out. When we don't do the things we're supposed to do, then the world's a mess. So in a way, it does kind of start and end with us, whether we like it or not. That's the deeper picture. You know, a lot of the time as Jews, we're so surface level and we're like, anti-Semitism, everyone hates us. It's all reminder. It's all being sent as a reminder. So um, Dan makes just a fantastic point. Israel just fundamentally understands that they don't have the luxury to be overly nice and merciful. They don't. This is the only option they have. But Israel also has to make smarter decisions which lead to peace and not constant fighting. I really repeat myself like a broken record because I see that the more Israel leans into its identity, the more peaceful things are. When Jews go up on a Temple Mount and pray, the Arabs take a seat. It's not surprising. When Jews are more spiritual, the Arabs respect it and they sit down. They comply because that's what they want to. They want to say, "Oh, Jews, you're acting like Jews. Okay, we know fundamentally our Quran tells us that if you guys are doing your job, then we will honor it because you're strong. This is how Hudaybiyah works. If you are strong, then we will take a seat. There will be a peaceful there will be a temporary peace permanently. So long as you are strong in your faith and in your identity, we will chill out. The moment you forget who you are, you fight amongst yourselves, you turn to progressive secular things, you move away from who you were supposed to be, then we will feel emboldened to fight you, to kill you, to defeat you, to overtake you. That's it. I mean, it's really not that more complicated. This is all of it. I love how like we're all trying to like Hasbah explain and get all these media movements and spend hundreds of millions of dollars to persuade the woke people and the this and the tell people how bad Islam is. That's all like it's smoke and mirrors. It's not really the crux of the issue. You know, we're just a lot of it's. I'm not like claiming I have all the answers, but it. I've been doing this shit for 6 years. It's so clear. Pardon my French. You know, I'm sitting here going all biblical and I throw out the S bomb. Yeah. And I am who I am. So let's get back to this. But this is a great video. So I have a lot of ranting to do.
Jewish community in Palestine at the time, and later the state of Israel, are threatened with extinction. Not only that this is practically and in reality the situation, but they say so very often. They get up in the morning and they say, we want to destroy the state of Israel. The Iranians say it. Radical Arabs say it. Radical Arab opinion in countries that made peace with Israel are saying it very often. The Palestinians, of course, want to destroy the Jewish state. They say very openly, not only in the Gaza Strip, but also in the West Bank, that the very existence of Israel is illegitimate, and perhaps the Palestinians are not strong enough to undermine the existence of the Jewish state today, but they can do it over a long period of time. In Gaza, they say very specific things. They say, we Arabs are going to win because we love death. You Jews are going to lose because you love life. So the danger is existential, and Israel cannot afford to adopt a policy that could cost it its very existence. So if you want to feel very good about yourself and you tell yourself that the world is something that it is not, and you're wrong, in the West, you're wrong, and then perhaps you will reconsider. In Israel, if we're wrong on the fundamental issues, we will cease to exist. Now, let me be very specific following your question, because it covers practically every field that you can imagine. Start with the perception of history. Start with what history taught people in Europe and the United States on the one hand, and in Israel on the other. Europe, to a very large extent, is a product of the First World War. And because of the futility of this war, and because people understand that there was nothing worth the enormous sacrifice of the First World War, at the end of the war, the conclusion was nie wieder Krieg. Anything is not as bad as war. War is the ultimate evil. War is the ultimate danger, and therefore, whatever happens, even if we have to capitulate, we will not go to war. And then the Second World War came, because the barbarians realized that the civilized people will not defend themselves, because they said, we are not willing to die for king and country. So they understood that the elites have weakened these societies to a point where they hoped they can destroy them. And even this traumatic lesson of the Second World War did not convince parts of the intelligentsia. And then they were willing to woo Stalin. They were willing to consider the Soviet Union as being a better approach to world affairs than what they had in the West, because they confused the imperfections of Western civilization with the pure evil of Stalin's Russia. And even later, when the Cold War came, and again they understood that Russia may be a danger, people in the 1980s came out in demonstrations. The nice people, the academics, the people who believed in rights and in peace and love and brotherhood came out to protest against American missiles in Europe that actually defended Europe from a Russian invasion. And even the wake-up that we expected, and to some extent it's there after Ukraine, is only very partial, Remember what's happening now. If Germany is willing to spend 100 billion euros on defense, the question is who will be the soldiers? Will they recruit Afghani immigrants in order to command their tanks in a war? Because people in Europe, the young generation in Europe, is not willing to fight for their freedom. So, and in America, probably, if you look at how this war is being perceived, also there is a very major problem. So this is their perception of history. I'll show you in a moment the Israeli side. It's the extreme opposite. If you go to the culture, to the cultural side, you will see something that I would never have believed had I not seen it on such a major scale. The assumption that whatever is wrong with the world is the guilt of the white man. And if you're white, you're by definition guilty. By the way, if you're a Jew, you're by definition white, even if you come from Ethiopia. So it doesn't really matter what the color of your skin is. Your whiteness is actually a reflection of being from Western civilization.
This is just, he's so articulate and he covers all directions. He doesn't miss a beat. People will put Jewish people in any box that allows them to hate us. And it's not about whether we take blame or not. The reality is the world blames us for everything. And again, I think it's because the world understands this, the fabric of the world understands that we are responsible for it, whether we like it or not. It's just like impossible for me not to see this. You can't not see this. It's such a tiny group of people. Why do they matter so much? Who cares about this microscopic people? We barely exist relative to the population, the world population. What do we have? 8 billion people? 15 million Jews were talked about everywhere all the time. All the time. It's crazy. And it's interesting what Dan brings up about the young Western generation not wanting to fight. And that's great in principle, meaning it's great not to want to fight wars. That's something all humans should strive for. But when there are people that want to kill you and get rid of you, you have to be willing to stand up for you, your family, and what you believe in. You have to. Society as a whole has to be willing to sacrifice in order to continue survival. Unless it doesn't value itself, unless the society, the culture, and the country you live in doesn't value itself, then it'll allow whichever other group to come in and take it over. But being that the Jewish people do value themselves, do understand that they need to, that no one else is going to do it for them, then we do what we got to do. Civilizations have become extinct because of this. I mean, the only reason why the Jews aren't extinct is because God has said so. Otherwise, we would have been extinct a long time ago. Because there are so many idiots among us. The only reason why there's any Ashkenazi Jewry left is because there's clearly a decision. You know, it was ordained for whatever reason that even though we were, slaughtered, 2/3 of Ashkenazi Jewry was wiped out, it wasn't totally destroyed. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. This is a very powerful video. Really, it's thought provoking. Really gets you to think. Follow, like, and share. Make sure to subscribe. Follow me on Instagram at Rafi the Realtor for all of your real estate needs in South Florida. And you can support the channel via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the pinned comment or description. I thank you, as always, for your continued support. Until next time, peace out.